And because we have no other way we can express some of these things, if indeed IPU was about the greater role of democratizing within communities of the world, I urge the IPU to up their game, to find the strength to speak to African leaders. Mr. Speaker, today we are seeing presidential elections in African countries being conducted by the sitting presidents in office who give no role to the electoral commissions in their countries. In the process, Mr. Speaker, their opponents are locked out of the race, their opponents are arrested, their opponents are detained, their opponents are abducted, their opponents are even killed, Mr. Speaker. The IPU must take over the role of the African Union, because the African Union, instead of speaking to this, they are busy congratulating their colleagues. The African Union has now become a talk shop, a special club for African presidents to protect each other. Mr. Speaker, we know of recent elections in Africa where senior African politicians have witnessed elections in their countries from prison, charged with treason, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we know of African countries where thousands of citizens have been killed. We know of African countries where Kenyans are being harassed in their hotels, in their businesses, in those countries, because they are being suspected to be the ones who are responsible for the unrest. Africans should know that Kenyans are very hard-working people. When they go to their countries, they are looking for business. They are not going there to play politics. I would like, at least as far as Kenya is concerned, our government to protect Kenyan citizens in such a countries where they are currently being harassed, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when I see the kind of business that African countries lose because of this instability, I say, how I wish the standing orders of Parliament of Kenya could be changed so that we could do substantive debate on this very, very serious issue, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, for some of us, our communities cut across nations. For example, if you take the Kenyan Somali, his relatives are in Somalia, his relatives are in Ethiopia. So when unrest takes place in those two countries, the Kenyan Somali is expected to keep quiet. Similarly, the Luos, the Maasais, they are in Kenya, they are in Tanzania. When their relatives face this kind of atrocities, we are supposed to keep quiet. Similarly, the Luhyas and Tesos, our relatives are in Uganda. And when these things happen, we are supposed to keep quiet. Maybe we should change standing orders so that African parliaments can boldly debate the nonsense that is going on where the African Union has failed.
But just that today we are discussing Tanzania. But what I find a bit disturbing with my fellow Robert is that Alai himself is struggling with his own governor, just a subsection of our country. He has an issue with the leadership of the county of Nairobi, which I agree. And he needs to advance changes that are necessary as a county assembly. But having such issue and then stepping away from that and trying to defend the regime, this regime which has been rendered illegitimate by Kenyans, is somehow a doublespeak on, according to me. We must stand firm on principle that we are well led by this constitution. If anybody attempts to avert, to launch an affront on our constitution, be it an MCA, a governor, an MP, a senate, or a president of this country, then we as citizens have the civic duty of stepping up and calling them out. So when I see people trying to assume political formations and defend the regime depending on where they sit, then that dilutes the essence of the principle of our constitution. Therefore, one, the united coalition of the deputies is not the opposition that this regime is facing. The real opposition that the regime is facing are us Kenyans, who are disgruntled by the leadership, the policies, including the bill on communication and many others that they are trying to advance. And that we will not relent. Whether they form new coalitions or not, we Kenyans will stand firm on calling for the rule of law, advancement of justice, tax justice, because we cannot continue paying taxes and the services are not commensurate. We cannot continue borrowing and increasing our odious debt, where then we are left with a heavy burden from our revenue collection. We're financing our taxes with over 70%, and then we have very little for development. And then on the other hand, we are trying to raise money for these shisha, affordable housing, avoidable housing projects that are not really revamping our economy. We have to agree and stand on principle that the problem we have is poor leadership, bad governance as a country called Kenya. Then, when you cross over to our neighbors, because you asked the question, when they have this law, Tanzania,
yes,
that you cannot challenge the final decision of the Chebukati, in quote, what happens? To me, that is silencing of the voice of dissent, and that is nothing short of dictatorship. Because if you're talking about governance, here we are having a political discourse. We should be able to agree and disagree. You should be able to challenge the outcome, the process, because an election has various elements that you look at for it to be credible. You have to look at the irregularities therein and the legality of it. If any of those things are not fully satisfied, then an interested person, any citizen, it could be a political person or just a civilian, must have the opportunity to raise that question and ask, since you are my employee as a president, even here in Kenya, President Ruto is my #1 employee, I pay him, we pay him. Why are you not comfortable with me checking how you came into being my servant? That is the question, Tanzanians, and as much as we respect their autonomy, they should have that space. Furthermore, I take you back to the AU. The African Union has a whole checklist on what a credible election ought to look like. There are those irreducible bare minimums, you know. It has to be free and fair. There has to be a process that is a legal process, a legal framework. There has to be freedom of association so that you can have various political parties coming into play. When that is not satisfied, then the outcome of that election is purely illegitimate. So these are the issues I'm saying. On principle, we have to stand and say, what really do we want to see? Not just for Kenya, not just for Nairobi, not just for Dagoretti South, but for us as the humans of Africa, because Africa is our interest. Much as the only upper hand we have on making changes is Kenya, because that's where we are all domiciled as Kenyans. But I want to implore on my colleagues that we cannot allow the myopic political formations that are existing in our country to blind the ambitions we have for having a better country, a better economy.
Why would you call it myopic?
Because, I mean, everything now is being clustered around the 2027 election. But nobody is coming to say, how are we going to transform our country? People are just trying to look at numbers, juggle numbers, you know. They keep trying to evoke the name of the late Right Honorable Raila Odinga, who is going to inherit ODM. Why? For re-election of 2027. But we have between now and then, what happens to the continuation of our odious debt? Is Robert Alai telling us that he's comfortable with what the Communication Commission did last time in switching off? Because remember, they had an attempt when we had the demonstrations. Is that something we can defend as Kenyans? No. That's an affront on our constitution and freedom of expression as Kenyans. So what I'm saying it's myopic because it's purely political, and our issue is economical and development. That's where the conversations need to reside.
So we're not really out of the woods yet when it comes also to us being blacked out, so to speak, if I'm using that corrupt English, that, you know, the Communications Authority can actually now give, you know, an order to all the TV stations that now you don't cover what is up